Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for my final thoughts and impressions on Mrs. Thatcher's War. Um, like many games I'm fortunate to review, I'm going to come straight out and say that I think this is a brilliant effort. I have not made many forays into wargaming the Falklands conflict before. Um, Partly because there's not that many titles out there, but also, I mean, I would have been 3 when this war broke out, and even then, it has a very immediate feeling to it. I mean, I know people who were in the Navy at the time. I've met one or two people in passing who happened to be in the armed forces. There's lots of publications now, both from the British and the Argentine side, that give it a real immediacy. But I think that this game, on the whole, covers the war in a very comprehensive way that, like many good war games, is respectful to both sides and gives each a bit of a fair hearing. Um, the solitaire approach does work great because it plays to the strengths of a live player, in this case the British, having to face all sorts of challenges in order to achieve a difficult objective, as was the case historically. Yes, the British came to the party with quite a few advantages, but they were also operating on an incredibly tight time schedule. They were completely at the mercy of the weather. And the other rather scary thing is how little they had in the way of a reserve. And by that I mean spare Harriers, spare logistical support. A lot of the Falklands War was fought a bit on a shoestring by the British, and if anything went badly wrong, I mean, there were cases where things did go horrendously wrong, but if things had gone, I'd say, any much worse, if that sentence makes sense, then it may well have been a defeat for the British. Argentina had a lot of disadvantages, but it also had a lot of strengths too. They were operating close to their home bases. Um, they had a substantial number of soldiers, and yes, the quality was very variable, but sometimes numbers do count. And equally, although most of their aircraft, other than the super attendades, the French fighters were quite behind the curve compared to the British Harrier, um, it still the fact that they had a lot of them. Sometimes simply being able to cover more ground than your opponent and overwhelm them at the point of contact can be an advantage. So things could have gone their way if things had been a little different. And on the naval front as well, they had the advantage of a reasonable fleet in being. And if it had perhaps been more boldly employed, perhaps more sensibly employed as well, because um, the operation which resulted in the loss of the Belgrano was certainly daring, given the circumstances, but it could have perhaps been better planned and better executed. All it really ended up achieving was giving the British an opportunity. And then, of course, the nail-biting dithering while they were waiting for permission to fire. But, I mean, all this is by the by. The fact is, the game models everything I have just talked about, and it does so in a very balanced way. The solitaire system, which covers the Argentine side of the board, delivers a really good performance in terms of showing you how fractured the Argentine decision making process could be, sometimes to their benefit, sometimes not. And you see this most strongly in their naval and air deployments, where aircraft will be initially committed to one sector, and then suddenly they'll be shuttled off to another sector. And this represents the problems the junta was having in trying to coordinate itself while also dealing with internal political dissent. In a way, it wasn't a very safe job Galtieri had, trying to keep all these guys in line and trying to run a sensible war. Don't forget, in theory, according to the plan, the British were simply meant to accept the status quo. The last thing the junta wanted was for them to turn up with a battle fleet and an invasion force and go, oi, get off that island. But it's all modelled very, very well, and the differing strengths of the Argentine ground units, and the and the air units gives you a good flavour for which aircraft were fantastic, which were slightly less than fantastic. Um, the only bit where it's very heavily abstracted is on the naval side, but I think that was a good decision too. So you get these naval counters, the two Argentine ones and the four British ones, where you get no stats on them whatsoever. You aren't going to get into a detailed naval game with these ships. But I think it is really well done because what it does is it takes the burden off you as the player because this game puts you in the high command position. So you're given just enough information and chrome to enable you to get a slightly granular feel of some elements of the war, but it's the sort of thing senior commanders would have had to have known in order to deploy their assets effectively. With the naval units, this watering down of the detail works splendidly because it leaves you free to decide on your naval deployments, wherever that may be. Um, and the game takes care of the rest. All that detail is folded into a series of charts and combat outcomes. And they're not unrealistic outcomes. As the British player, I mean, whenever, I'll bring that map back quickly, whenever I put my carriers onto either air shield or air superiority missions, you do get really nervous because there is a chance, even with escorts, that those carriers will not come back. But if you don't commit them to those missions, then those Argentinian air groups are going to stack up, which is bad news for your guys on the Falklands. So you need to do it. You can't, unless you are so short of resources, you can't afford not to. And that's the beauty of the system that simplifies the details of that for you. All you're left with, as people like Woodward were, is the tough decision: where, how much. And I think I like the way that this game employs a two-map system. I did initially wonder why they didn't just go for a big map that had the strategic map incorporated, and maybe physically attached to this. But as I was playing, I realised the genius of it because in practical player terms, having an A5 and an A4 separate map means that you can adjust this game to suit your playing surface. And depending on where I play it in future, I may well, next time, have the strategic map stacked above or below the main map. The graphics, of course, as I commented in my first video, are superb. I mean, I bought the unboxed Ziploc version of this game. What else can I say about this? Oh yes, the rules. Now, I'd commented that the rules were compact, and that's very true. They are compact in more ways than one when you look at the tiny, tiny print. Once you get used to it, the flow of the game makes a lot of sense. You have all these different phases, lots of things happen within a phase. My only slight criticism, because of the sheer amount of what can happen in a turn, I realised they had to make a sensible compromise, but another player aid would have been great because a lot of these trigger events that need a dice roll to resolve. And while you do get some of them, like the news headline, wrong side. You do get some of them, like the news headline events explanations. You still have to refer to the rule book to figure out what some of these do. And certain other roles, like the Argentine aerial redeployments and Admiral Anaya sending his ships to sea or not, are all in here. So I was finding it a tad frustrating because you're trying to get used to the system and you have to have your rule book open next to you, and as you progress through a turn you have to keep turning the pages to find the relevant rule that tells you what. You get these little dice icons on the, I don't know if you can see, showing you what the consequences of each dice roll are. Now, I don't think this is a game-breaking problem because with sufficient practice and depending on how often you play this game, after a while it will become second nature. And although the dice rolls you need to trigger certain events are variable, so it's not a one size fits all system, once you get there, you've got there. I also greatly admire the designer's very, very detailed design notes at the back of the game. Now, sorry, the back of the rule book even. Now, I'd commented favourably on these when I introduced the game, but I just want to say that they are very, very good for what they are. It's a mix of very in-depth research. You can see from the formidable bibliography again, and by the fact that he actually went to the Falklands. I will say that he does have a slightly pro-British stance, or maybe more accurately, pro-Falkland Islanders stance. But none of it is pure opinion. Everything he says is evidence based and backed up. I do find it interesting that the fact that they've mentioned this game is apparently banned in Argentina is both a compliment and a selling point. Now, I've never been to Argentina, and I've not I've not read anything really other than the official publications on their side of the conflict. So I don't know how the Falklands conflict is taught in Argentina today, is what I'm trying to say. But if that is true, then it's probably a slightly sad indictment that, you know, their people deserve a more balanced account, if only to honour the memory of all the people that they lost out there. You know, there's nothing more insulting than a whitewash, especially to people who endured so much. At the hands of the enemy, at the hands of the weather, and as I gather in the case of the Argentinian armed forces, very often at the hands of their own officers. So not great. But be that as it may, that's probably a debate I shouldn't get into, not in the context of a game review. But I think even those who know the Falklands conflict well will find reading his comments rewarding. And he does include some marvellous photography as well. So overall, I would say Mr. Madison's to be congratulated for producing a very splendid simulation. It's a very portable, accessible game. You could get into this as someone in their late teens with a bit of concentration. The counters are very well designed, laid out, and most importantly, if I hold up the contents of the entire game's counters, there are not many of them. This isn't one of those monster campaign games. You will get through this game, you know, the setup and everything pretty quickly. It's engaging, it tells a lively narrative. I often judge a war game by how often a cold trickle of nervous sweat goes down my back while I'm making decisions. And I will say with, you know, this this game does that. You have so many scary moments in this game. I haven't finished playing through the scenario I was using to demo. I've played a couple of turns since I made the video. And it's getting slightly better for the British, but there's still a lot that's terrifying me. So that is the mark of a good game, a good simulation, and one that teaches you something about the totality of a military situation. It's not just about the operations, it's the wider perspective, the political, who's helping me, who's helping them. Oh, great, the Americans are lending me a landing ship. Oh no, the Soviets have just shared satellite photos with the Argentines. No. All these things that are out of your control, but that you have to deal with the consequences of. You really do feel, in an admittedly simplified way, that you are dealing with this conflict and you're struggling to resolve this very difficult situation. So, well done, Mr. Madison. I look forward to trying some of your other games in the near future, I hope, because if this one is anything to go by, then the others are probably quite amazing too. So, yes, I'll wrap up there. As always, thank you guys for sticking with me through this series. I always enjoy having your company, and keep those comments coming. Please do ask any questions if there's anything I've not covered in this series you'd like to know more about the game. Please do ask. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Massive hello to all my veterans. As always, guys, it's so good to see you all. Hope you've enjoyed this, and hope you enjoy some of the other content I have in the pipeline for you. The very next thing is going to be a Ships of War episode, but I won't clog up this by turning it into an upcoming news thing. To anyone who's new, a very warm welcome to you. If this is the first of my videos you've seen, then please check out the rest of this series, particularly if it's curiosity about Mrs. Thatcher's war that brought you here. If you're into wargaming more generally, feel free to wander around the channel. I hope you find something else that you'll like. And most importantly, hope I'll see you again. So whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, take care, and I'll look forward to our next meeting. Bye.